I want you to think about something. Think about the moment, the exact second, when a bully realizes he picked the wrong fight. Not when the first punch lands, not when the crowd goes quiet. That moment happens before all of that. It happens when the bully looks across the distance between him and the person he thought was weak, and something in his gut says, wait. I saw that moment. Not in a schoolyard, not in a bar, not on any street corner on any planet I'd ever heard of before I shipped out on the resolute measure. I saw it 62,000 kilometers above a burning moon called Vyarth Sol, on the day the Crethani Empire brought its war fleet to our doorstep, and stayed long enough to regret every single choice that led them there. This is not a story about heroism. I want to be clear about that right up front. This is a story about what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. When you look at a species that has been gentle with you over and over, across decades of careful diplomacy, and you decide that gentleness is a character flaw you can exploit. The Crethani made that mistake. And by the time they understood what they had done, their king was on his knees in chains on a human ship. Set up. Let me back up. My name is Cale Morrow. I was a communications officer aboard the Resolute Measure, a Terran Alliance Deep Range cruiser assigned to the Outer Corridor Watch, which is a diplomatic way of saying we sat on the edge of contested space and made sure nothing crossed into Terran territory without going through us first. Not glamorous work. Long patrols, longer silences, a lot of maintenance cycles and card games and arguments about what constituted a real meal when the synthesizers were calibrated wrong. We had a crew of about 412 people, mixture of backgrounds as most Alliance ships were by that point. Engineers from the Europa Collective, Marines from the Martian Defense Corps, navigators trained at the Titan Academy. Our captain was a woman named Admiral Sina Voral, a thin woman with sharp eyes, and the kind of stillness that made newer crew members uncomfortable until they understood that it wasn't coldness. It was the particular quality of focus that comes from someone who has been in enough situations that nothing surprises her anymore. She had a habit of standing at the observation window during patrol cycles, just watching, not looking at anything specific, just watching the stars turn. I used to think it was meditative. Later I understood it was something else. She was reading the space around us, the same way a sailor reads water, looking for patterns, looking for the things that were slightly different from how they should be. She noticed the Crethani before our sensors did. The Crethani Empire is, and I want to describe this carefully because I need you to understand both what they were and what they thought they were, a civilization that had built its entire cultural identity around a concept called Veth. There's no perfect human translation for it. The closest approximation is something like the natural hierarchy of the capable. The Crethani believed, genuinely and completely, that the universe sorted beings into predators and prey, into the dominant and the accommodating, and that this sorting was not only natural but moral. The strong were meant to lead, the weak were meant to serve. And they were by most metrics strong. Their biology is imposing, even by galactic standards. Average Crethani stands somewhere around 7 feet tall, with a skeletal structure that evolved on a high-gravity world, dense, thick-boned, with a natural musculature that made them look like something carved rather than grown. Their skin is a deep mineral gray, almost metallic in certain lighting conditions. They have 4 arms, 2 primary, 2 secondary, and their cranial structure gives them a distinctive silhouette, with a wide jaw and a brow ridge that slopes back at an angle that makes them look perpetually challenging. They are not ugly. I want to be honest about that. There is a kind of power in how they look that is almost architectural. Standing in front of a Crethani diplomat is like standing in front of a cathedral. You feel the weight of design behind it. But they were arrogant, structurally arrogant, the way some institutions get when they have been powerful long enough that they have forgotten how they got that way. For about 30 years before the incident at Vyarth Sol, the Crethani Empire had been pushing at the edges of Terran space. Not openly, they were too careful for that, at least in those early years. Disputed claims over mining rights on uninhabited moons. Redrawn patrol paths that edged slightly further into contested corridors with each cycle. Diplomatic communications that were technically polite but carried an undercurrent of contempt that no human translator could fully soften. The Terran Alliance had responded to all of it with patience. Not weakness. I want to be specific about this because the Crethani misread it and the misreading matters. The Alliance was not patient because it was afraid. It was patient because it had done the math. A war with the Crethani, fought in the outer corridor, would cost approximately 800,000 human lives at minimum projections, would destabilize 3 separate trade networks that 3 other civilizations depended on, and would solve exactly nothing politically that couldn't be solved by simply waiting the Crethani out. The Alliance had long institutional memory. It had been through this before with other empires, other species. The pattern was always the same: the aggressive push, the diplomatic dances, the eventual moment when the aggressor overextended, when they pushed past the point where restraint still made sense for the patient party. The Alliance was simply waiting for that moment. The Crethani, who did not have this institutional memory, interpreted the waiting as confirmation of their worldview. Humans were accommodating. Humans were prey. Humans could be pushed all the way to the edge of their territory and would simply keep retreating. They were not entirely wrong about how far we would retreat. They were catastrophically wrong about what would happen when we didn't. The resolute measure picked up the Crethani advance fleet on the morning of what would have been a perfectly routine patrol cycle. I was running diagnostics on the long-range communication arrays when the sensor station went from routine background noise to something that sounded like every alarm on the ship inhaling at once. "Multiple contacts," said our sensor chief, a young man named Tors, in a voice that was doing its level best to stay professional. "I'm counting. 47 vessels, Crethani configuration. Formation pattern is it's an encirclement approach, Admiral." I turned from my station. Vorol was already at the observation window. She had turned around slowly, so slowly it was almost theatrical, and was looking at the tactical display that Tors was pulling up on the main screen. 47 orange markers, curving around us in a wide, precise arc. The math of it was obvious even before the tactical computer confirmed. This was not a patrol. This was not an accident. This was a coordinated approach, and the resolute measure was at the center of the geometry. "Comms," she said. "Yes, Admiral. Get me the Crethani command vessel. Standard diplomatic frequency." I started working the channels. It took about 40 seconds to establish the link, 40 seconds during which nobody on the bridge said anything, and the only sound was the low, oscillating tone of the proximity alert system, which Tors had dialed down to barely audible because the full volume would have made it impossible to think. The Crethani fleet was still moving, still tightening the arc. The connection went through. The main display shifted from the tactical overlay to a visual feed, and there he was. High Commander Vethorel Dorek. I recognized him from his intelligence file. He was older than the photographs suggested, deep lines in the mineral gray of his face, secondary arms folded close to his body in what their culture signified as authority posture. He was wearing full military colors, a deep red and gold that the Crethani reserved for formal engagements. He had dressed for this. "Human vessel." His voice came through the translator with a slight half-second delay, the way it always does with Crethani, because their speech uses a subsonic register that the translators have to normalize upward. "You are operating within a boundary zone that the Crethani Empire has formally claimed in Treaty Revision 47. "Treaty Revision 47, Vorol said, and her voice was so mild it was almost gentle, "was not agreed to by the Terran Alliance. We acknowledged receipt of the document. That is not the same thing as agreement." Dorek's secondary arms shifted slightly. "The Empire does not require agreement. The Empire requires compliance." "I see." A small pause. "And the 47 warships currently forming an encirclement pattern around my vessel, are those meant to facilitate a discussion, or are they a declaration of intent?" "Consider them a demonstration of the natural order." Vorol nodded slowly, the way you nod when someone tells you something you already expected. "I see. I'm going to need a moment to contact Alliance Command. Secure channel." "You have 15 of your minutes, human. Then the demonstration will proceed." The feed cut. Vorol turned. And for the first time since the sensors went off, she smiled, just slightly, just at the corner of her mouth, in a way that made several of the junior bridge crew look at her like she had lost her mind. "Get me Admiral Cho," she said. "Get me the Iron Meridian and the Vessel of Patience." "Admiral," Tors said carefully, "those ships are positioned." "I know exactly where they're positioned, Mr. Tors." She clasped her hands behind her back and looked at the tactical display with those sharp, reading eyes. I also know exactly where the Crethani think they are. Build tension. Here is something that I did not know in those 47 minutes. Here is something that I suspect Dorak did not know either. The resolute measure was not alone. The Terran Alliance had been watching the Crethani push for 3 years. Watching, cataloging, running projections, and with the particular quality of preparation that marks an organization that has been through this before, pre-positioning assets. When the Crethani Empire had filed Treaty Revision 47, the Alliance's response had been diplomatic on the surface and very, very practical underneath. Within 6 months of that filing, the Alliance had quietly repositioned 4 battle groups along the outer corridor. Not parked in plain sensor range, that would have been provocative, and the Alliance was not interested in provocation. They were positioned at the Lagrange points of the 3 nearest large bodies, nestled into the gravitational geometry of the system, in a configuration that any competent Crethani naval strategist would have predicted if they had been looking for it. The Crethani had not been looking for it. They had been looking at us, at the resolute measure, at the single human vessel sitting exactly where they expected it to be, doing exactly what they expected it to be doing, confirming everything they already believed about human behavior. They had 47 ships. 4 human battle groups is approximately 230 vessels when you count support craft. Roughly a third of those are active combat tonnage, destroyers, cruisers, 2 carrier-grade platforms. The rest are screens, support logistics chains that can sustain a fleet action for weeks without resupply. While Dorak's fleet had been spending the past 3 years slowly edging forward, rewriting patrol paths, testing boundary markers, the Alliance had been building a cage around the space he was edging into. He walked his fleet directly into it. And in those 47 minutes while Voral was supposedly consulting Alliance command, what she was actually doing was coordinating the timing, making sure every element of the trap was in position, making sure the communications were clear, the subspace relays were synced, the legal and diplomatic record was solid, because the Alliance, even now, was thinking about the aftermath. That is the thing I want you to hold on to. Even then, even with a fleet of warships pointing at us, the human side of this operation was thinking about what happened after, about the peace terms, about the precedent being set, about the other empires watching from a distance, taking notes, updating their own assessments of what humanity actually was. Patience is not passivity. Patience is doing all your work in advance so that when the moment comes, you are ready and your opponent is not. The 15 minutes expired. Dorak's face appeared on the screen again. Your time is concluded, human vessel. You will transmit your navigational codes and stand down your systems. This sector is under Crethani authority. High Commander Dorak, Voral said, and her voice had changed, not dramatically, not into the kind of movie villain calm that people imagine when they picture command authority. It had changed the way a room changes when someone opens a window in winter. A subtle drop, a clarification of temperature. I'm going to ask you to do something, and I want you to understand that I'm asking in good faith, and that the outcome of the next few hours depends on how you respond. Dorak's expression shifted slightly. I couldn't read Crethani micro-expressions well, but Tors could. He had spent 2 years on a diplomatic posting, and I saw Tors go very still. Stand your fleet down, Voral said. Return to Crethani-recognized space. We will resume negotiations through the established diplomatic channels. A pause. On Dorak's end, one of his secondary arms moved, a gesture I didn't know the meaning of. Later, Tors told me it was the equivalent of a very deliberate, very controlled laugh. You are one ship, Dorak said. You are one ship, surrounded by 47 of mine, and you ask me to stand down. The subsonic register of his voice, even through the translator, carried something vast and cold in it. This is the limit of your species, human. You speak of negotiation from a position of zero power. You speak of diplomacy from within a trap. This is why you will always serve and never lead. I notice, Voral said carefully, that you said your trap. A half second, 2 seconds. Begin active sensor sweep, Dorak said to someone off-screen. And that was the moment I was telling you about, not when the punch lands, the moment before. I watched it happen on the communication feed. Watched Dorak's face as the sensor returns started coming in. Watched him turn from the screen to look at something, his own tactical display, presumably. Watched the still, architectural certainty of his expression develop, very slowly, a fracture. 47 Crethani vessels. And suddenly, on every direction of their formation, on every bearing they might run, the gravitational shadows resolved into shapes. Destroyer profiles, cruiser silhouettes, two enormous flat-decked masses that could only be carrier platforms, their fighter bays already cycling. 223 ships. The cage door closed. What I remember most vividly from the next 4 minutes is not what anyone said. It's the sounds of the resolute measure. The hum of systems coming to full operational status, not warming up, because they had never fully cooled, just unlocking. The quiet cadence of targeting computers in the lower deck, running their calculations with the unhurried precision of systems that had been preloaded and were now simply confirming data. The footsteps of the Marine detachment moving into position in the corridors below the bridge, not running, walking, because they had been briefed and prepared and there was nothing to rush. The resolute measure had been ready for this for 3 years. You could feel it in the way the ship moved through those 4 minutes. The way a body moves when it has been coiled, waiting, and finally, not with urgency, but with certainty, begins to unfold. I kept the communication channel open. I could hear the Crethani fleet responding to their own sensor data. Not clearly, the translation matrix was picking up fragments, partial phrases, the specific acoustic signature of a military command structure encountering unexpected information. I'm not going to pretend I understood all of it, but I understood the register. I had grown up in a port city. I had heard that register before in much smaller contexts. It was the register of people realizing they had made a serious error in judgment. Dorak's image returned to our screen. He had not moved. He was still in exactly the same posture, that authority posture, secondary arms folded back straight, chin level. But the fracture was bigger now. The certainty had changed into something else, something that was performing certainty rather than being it. "This changes nothing," he said. "High Commander." Voral's voice was genuinely gentle now, gentle in the specific way that someone is gentle when they are trying to prevent an unnecessary injury. "You have 47 ships. We have 223. Your vessels are encircled on every bearing. We have already locked targeting solutions on your entire fleet. I have the authorization to engage, and I have the tactical position to do so with minimal losses on our side." "Then engage," Dorak said. "The Crethani Empire does not negotiate under threat." "I'm not threatening, I'm describing." A pause. "I'm offering you something, High Commander. I'm offering you the chance to contact your sovereign to explain the situation and to begin the process of withdrawing your fleet. I will hold my ships in position for as long as that conversation takes. I am not in a hurry." The fracture in Dorak's expression widened. I believe he had expected one of two things. Either we wouldn't have the firepower to back the position, in which case we would have backed down. Or we would engage immediately, in which case he could frame the destruction of the resolute measure as the opening act of a war that the Crethani were prepared to win. He had not expected patience. He had not expected to be offered time. "The Crethani do not retreat," he said. "This isn't a retreat," Voral said. "This is an opportunity. I would like to help you take it. But I need you to make that decision soon because I have 223 ships holding position, and that takes coordination, and at some point the mathematics of it will require me to act." Dorak cut the feed. Climax. The next 22 minutes are the part of this story that I find hardest to tell. Not because of the violence, there was actually remarkably little of it, compared to what there could have been, but because of the specific quality of those 22 minutes, the way time moved through them. We held position. All 224 of us, the resolute measure and the 4 battle groups, sitting in the cold geometric perfection of the trap, and we waited. The Crethani fleet sat in the middle of us. I could see them on the tactical display. 47 orange markers, very still. It's an interesting thing, watching a military force grapple with information it isn't ready for. They are not stupid. The Crethani are not a stupid people. But their entire command culture was built around Veth, around the assumption of natural hierarchy, and the natural hierarchy had just been violently disrupted. You could almost feel it happening on the tactical display, the psychological recalibration working its way through their chain of command. "Contact from the Crethani command vessel," my station reported. I checked the frequency. It's not coming to us, they're hailing deep space, Krethani Imperial Relay. Durek was calling home. We let him. We made no attempt to interfere with the communication, no electronic warfare, no jamming. We just sat there, patient and enormous, and let the High Commander tell his Emperor what he had found. I wish I knew what that conversation sounded like. I imagine it was not easy. I imagine explaining to the head of an empire that you walked your fleet into a trap, and that the species you had been systematically underestimating for 30 years had been running an operation around you the entire time, is not a conversation anyone would want to have. At minute 19, the hailing tone on the Krethani Imperial frequency changed. The deep space relay protocol dropped. A new connection opened, and the signal that came through was different. Higher encryption, different authentication markers. That's not Dorek's ship, Tors said quietly. That authentication header, those are sovereign-level codes. Someone sat up very straight at the navigation station. The Emperor, someone said. Not the Emperor, Tors said slowly, staring at his screen with the expression of a man who was reading something he wasn't sure he was interpreting correctly. The Emperor's seal, but the biomarkers on the signal. The signal is originating from a ship that's been in transit, a private vessel, not military configured. He looked up. I think the Imperial Crown Prince is in this system. The bridge went quiet in a specific way. Why, said Lieutenant Adara Kesh, from the navigation station, in a voice that was doing its best to stay flat, would the Krethani Crown Prince be in this system? Nobody answered, but I think most of us were arriving at the same conclusion at roughly the same time. The Krethani Crown Prince had come to watch. He had come to watch his empire's fleet close the trap. He had come to witness the beginning of the subjugation of human space from a safe observation distance, close enough to see, far enough to be protected. He had come for the performance of power, for the experience of watching Veth in action. He had come, in other words, to see us on our knees. And instead, he was looking at 223 human warships. Admiral Cho's voice came through the secure channel. She commanded the Iron Meridian, the flagship of the first battle group, and she had been running silent for the past 22 minutes. Her voice, when it came through, was measured and almost conversational. Morrow, long range, picks up a private vessel configuration at bearing 274. Non-military profile, but Krethani Imperial transponder codes. You seeing that? Yes, Admiral. Flag it for the Admiral Vorol, and get me a targeting solution on it. Passive lock only, don't illuminate it. I flagged it for Vorol. She came to my station and looked at the data. She looked at it for a long moment. He came to watch, she said, very quietly, with a quality in her voice I hadn't heard before. Not anger, something more precise than anger. It appears so, Admiral. She straightened up. She walked back to the center of the bridge and stood there for a moment, looking at the tactical display. 47 Krethani warships, 223 of ours, and somewhere at bearing 274, a private vessel with an Imperial transponder code sitting very, very still. Hail the Imperial vessel, she said. I opened the channel. The connection took longer this time, about 90 seconds, which is long in communications terms. Long enough that I had time to wonder whether they would simply run. But running wasn't really an option. We had the lag-range coverage on every bearing. There was nowhere to go without passing through one of our battle groups. The feed opened. He was young, that's what struck me first. Crown Prince Shalveth Dorankai was young, younger than I'd expected, maybe middle-aged by Krethani reckoning, which put him at somewhere around 40 human years. He was wearing civilian clothes, not military, which was an interesting choice for someone who had come to watch a military operation. There were two advisors visible behind him, both in postures that in any culture would be read as controlled panic. The Crown Prince's face was, I want to be accurate here, not afraid. He was too well trained to show fear directly, but there was something in his expression that was very close to the face Dorak had made when the sensor returns came in. That fracture, that moment of reckoning. Crown Prince Dorankai, Vorol said. Admiral, his translator voice was smoother than Dorak's, better calibrated. This is a diplomatic vessel under the conventions of... Yes, Vorol said. I'm aware of the conventions. I'm also aware that the Crown Prince of the Crethani Empire is present in an active operational theater in which 47 Crethani warships are currently in violation of Alliance space. A pause. That puts me in an unusual position. I am here as an observer, Dorankai said carefully, in a private capacity. The Imperial seal on your transponder code suggests otherwise. A silence. Behind the Crown Prince, one of the advisors leaned in and said something in Crethani that the translator rendered as, "Sovereign authority, do not acknowledge, do not." "Crown Prince Dorankai," Voral said, and now the gentleness was gone, replaced by something that was completely flat and completely serious, and somehow more unsettling than either of the previous registers. "I am going to ask you and your vessel to proceed to the following coordinates, and I am going to ask you to understand that this is not a negotiation. The coordinates are being transmitted to your navigation system now. Please proceed there and maintain station." The coordinates, I should tell you, were the docking approach vector for the Iron Meridian. The Crown Prince understood immediately what that meant. I saw him understand it. The secondary arms, he had been holding them in an authority posture, echoing his father's high commander, lowered slowly for the first time in the communication. "You can't," one of the advisors started. "We can," Voral said simply, "and we will. And I want to be clear, Crown Prince, that the alternative in which your vessel attempts to transit our position without permission has outcomes that I would rather not pursue. Please comply. We will ensure your safety, and we will treat your presence with the respect that your rank deserves." A long moment. "You are taking me prisoner," Dorankai said. "I am taking you into protective custody," Voral said, "pending the resolution of an active military incident. The distinction matters, and I intend to honor it." Dorankai looked at her for several seconds. Then he said something to his navigation officer. His vessel began to move toward the Iron Meridian. "I want to tell you about what happened when they brought him aboard. Not because of anything dramatic that was said, but because of the visual of it. Because the image of it was transmitted fleet-wide, and I know that image went beyond our fleet, because the Crethani were watching it too. Because we had left their communication links entirely open, deliberately, and we knew their entire fleet was seeing the same feeds." Crown Prince Shalveth Dorankai, heir to the Crethani Empire, walked off his private vessel and into the docking bay of the Iron Meridian. He was flanked by two of his advisors. He was in his civilian clothes. He was walking under his own power, upright, with his secondary arms in a neutral position, and there was a certain kind of dignity in the way he walked, an awareness that he was being seen, and a decision to be seen in a particular way. The Marine Honor Guard that Admiral Cho had arranged was, I think, something he had not expected. Not a detention detail, not armed guards. An honor guard, 12 Marines in dress uniforms, standing at attention in 2 lines along the path from the docking ramp to the main corridor, as though they were receiving a head of state. Admiral Cho herself was there. She is a small woman, which I think surprised Dorankai. The Crethani, despite 30 years of intelligence on human leadership structures, seemed to perpetually expect us to be physically imposing in the ways that mattered to them. Cho is about 5'3", with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of unhurried movements that mean very specific things about the quality of a person. She inclined her head as he reached the end of the ramp. Not a bow, a nod. The kind of acknowledgement you give to someone of significant rank when you are of equivalent rank yourself. "Crown Prince Dorankai, I'm Admiral Cho, commanding officer of the 1st Battle Group. I want to assure you that you are aboard as our guest. Your advisors are welcome. Your vessel will be secured and undamaged, and we will provide everything your comfort and that of your staff requires." Dorankai looked at her. He looked at the Marine Guard. He looked at the docking bay, at the size of the Iron Meridian, which is a carrier-class vessel, and contains approximately that scale of engineering ambition in every visible surface. He looked at the calm, systematic efficiency of humans moving at their work around him, none of whom were staring at him, because they had all been briefed to treat him as a diplomatic arrival. "You are very deliberate," he said finally. "Your people." "We try to be," Cho said. "This was planned," he wasn't asking, "not today. Not even this year." "No. How long Cho considered the question. She is a person who gives direct answers when she can. "Long enough to be certain," she said. Meanwhile, on the Resolute measure, Dorek had gone quiet. We had been monitoring the Crethani fleet communication internally since the Crown Prince's vessel had changed course, and the shift in the traffic pattern was significant. A lot of traffic. Fast. The kind of communication volume that in human terms would mean a command structure rapidly revising its options and finding all of them closed. Dorek hailed us at minute 41. His face on the screen had changed completely. The authority posture was still there. The Crethani command culture does not easily release its forms, but it was the posture without the confidence behind it, the architecture without the faith. "Admiral Vorol," he said. "High Commander." "The Crown Prince," he stopped, started again. "I require confirmation that the Crown Prince is unharmed." "The Crown Prince is in excellent health and is being received as a guest aboard the Iron Meridian. I can arrange a direct communication if you require confirmation." A long pause. "What are your terms?" And here is the moment I think about most when I think about that day, because Vorol did not list demands. She did not deliver a speech. She did not perform the victory. She said, "The Crethani fleet will withdraw to recognized Crethani space. Treaty Revision 47 will be formally withdrawn. The Crethani Empire will enter into a new round of diplomatic engagement with the Terran Alliance within 90 days, conducted in good faith and without preconditions. The Crown Prince will be transferred to a neutral diplomatic vessel of your choosing once the withdrawal is complete and the treaty withdrawal is confirmed." That was all. No reparations, no territorial concessions, no public humiliation demanded. Just stop and talk, like you should have done 30 years ago. Dorek stared at her. I have tried to figure out in the years since what he was thinking in that moment, whether he was relieved or furious or something more complicated. I think it was complicated. I think the terms being so restrained was, in some ways, harder for him than punitive terms would have been. Punitive terms would have confirmed the world view, the strong take from the weak, and now the positions are simply reversed. Restrained terms require a different interpretation of what just happened. Restrained terms mean, we never wanted to fight you, we wanted you to stop. Agreed, Dorek said. And the Crethani fleet began to withdraw. Resolution. It took 11 days. 11 days from the beginning of the withdrawal to the confirmation of Treaty Revision 47 being formally rescinded. 11 days during which the Crown Prince remained aboard the Iron Meridian, entirely at liberty in comfortable quarters, able to contact his advisors and his fleet, but present and visible as a reminder of what the morning had meant. He and Cho talked. A lot, apparently. I wasn't in those conversations, and I only know what Cho included in her official log, which was selective, as command logs tend to be, because the thing she thought was worth recording was not diplomatic detail but a single observation. She wrote, "The Crown Prince asked me on the third day whether we had built the trap specifically for his father's fleet, or whether it had been intended as a general deterrent. I told him the truth, that we had built it as a deterrent, and that we had hoped it would never be needed. He was quiet for a long time after that. I believe he understood for the first time that restraint is not the same as incapacity. I read that entry a lot. I think about those words. Restraint is not the same as incapacity. That is the thing the Crethani had never understood. The thing that empires that have never faced a genuine reckoning often fail to understand. They saw us pulling back and assumed the pulling back was the full extent of what we could do. They didn't understand that the pulling back was the choice we were making while the other option was being constructed. The transfer of the Crown Prince happened on the 12th day. A neutral diplomatic vessel from the Verath Collective, a third party with no stake in the conflict, arrived at the agreed coordinates and received Dorankai and his advisors without incident. He paused on the docking ramp of the Iron Meridian before he crossed over, turned back. Admiral Cho was there as she had been when he arrived. He held his primary arms in a specific configuration, both of them crossed at the wrist, which in Crethani culture is a gesture that means something like, "I have been changed by this." It's not an apology. It's an acknowledgement of transformation. It's what you do when someone shows you something about the world you didn't know before. Cho inclined her head, the same nod she had given him when he arrived. He crossed over, the airlock sealed. "I want to tell you about the chains now, because I realize I haven't yet, and you're probably wondering whether the title was honest. It was honest, but not in the way you might have imagined. There were no physical chains. The Crethani crown prince was never physically restrained at any point during his time on the Iron Meridian. He was a guest, as Voral had said, and he was treated as one. The chains were the situation. That's what chains are in the end. Not metal or energy restraints. Not physical force. Chains are the moment when someone who believed themselves free, who believed themselves powerful, untouchable, operating from a position of natural authority, discovers that the ground they were standing on was not ground at all. Dorankai had come to watch a performance of power. He had expected to see the chains. He had expected to see them on us. Instead, he had been the one who couldn't leave. And when he finally could leave, when the withdrawal was complete and the terms were confirmed and the diplomatic vessel arrived, he was leaving into a different world than the one he had arrived in. The Crethani Empire was the same empire it had been 12 days before, in all the ways that things are still technically the same. But something had been understood that hadn't been understood before. And understanding, in my experience, does not reverse. Once you see clearly, you can choose to look away, but you cannot choose to unsee. The new diplomatic engagement began 63 days later. Not 90, 63. The Crethani requested the earlier date. I don't know exactly what that meant in terms of their internal politics, but people who study the Crethani Empire professionally told me it was significant. The first round of talks produced a boundary agreement that both sides found acceptable. Not perfect, these things never are, but legitimate. Built on actual conversation, actual compromise, actual math about what each side needed and could live with. The kind of agreement that has a chance of lasting. The second round, the following year, produced a framework for shared resource management in the outer corridor. The third round produced a cultural exchange program, which is where I think the real long-term work happens, honestly. Not in the fleet positions or the boundary agreements, but in the moment when a young Crethani student sits across a table from a young human student and has to revise their model of what the other one is. Ending line. I've told this story a lot of times over the years, at different kinds of events, to different kinds of people, and the question I get asked most often across all of them, from military historians to schoolchildren to other veterans, is some version of, was it worth it? Was the patience worth it? All those years of watching them push and not pushing back, knowing what we had and choosing not to use it, was it worth it? And my answer is always the same. I think about Admiral Cho's log entry. Restraint is not the same as incapacity. I think about what it would have looked like if we had gone to war in those early years. If we had matched every Crethani push with a counter-push, every aggressive patrol with an aggressive response. We might have one. Probably would have one, eventually. We had the numbers even then if we'd been willing to commit them. But winning a war and winning a peace are two different projects, and they don't always go together. Instead, we built a cage and waited for them to walk into it. And then we didn't destroy them in it. We showed them what the inside of the cage looked like, and we opened the door and we said, this is what was always possible. This is what we chose not to do. Can we try a different option now? And they said yes. That's not a dramatic ending. I know it's not what you came here expecting, maybe. No last stand, no sacrifice, no moment of fire and blood and glory. Just a door opening. Just a crown prince on a docking ramp, making a gesture his culture uses when something has changed, and a human admiral nodding back at him. Just two species discovering that the word restraint had been keeping them in the same cage, for the same reasons, for 30 years, and that both of them could walk out of it if one of them was willing to go first. We went first, and the universe for once noticed,